Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Boston Children's Hospital open meeting in honor of Pediatric Health Equity and Inclusion. My name is Candace Reddy, and I am the Senior Director in the Office of Government Relations. We have two very special guests here, former Governor Deval Patrick and our own CEO, Dr. Kevin Churchwell. This event is co-sponsored by the Office of Government Relations and the Office of Health Equity and Inclusion. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Valerie Ward, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, for her leadership in this space, and I also want to thank Amy DeLong and Jamie Gaines for making this event happen. We are honored to feature a conversation between Deval Patrick and CEO Kevin Churchwell. Thank you very much for joining us. First, I want to introduce our guests. We have our CEO, Kevin Churchwell, who needs little formal introduction. Dr. Churchwell took over as CEO in March after working in senior leadership here for 7 years, and you can see firsthand the strides we have made in pediatric health equity and inclusion. I will note that he and Sandy led the effort last year to develop Boston Children's Hospital's formal declaration on equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is a published statement of our measurable goals and commitment to guide our work in becoming a leader in equity for all. We want to welcome Deval Patrick to the hospital. Deval Patrick served as a two-term governor of Massachusetts from 2007 to 2015. In that time, he expanded affordable health care to more than 98% of the state, launched the initiative to expand clean energy and biotech industries, steered a state out of a recession to a 25-year high in employment, and made unprecedented investments in Massachusetts public schools, among many other accomplishments. After leaving office, he launched an impact investment fund at Bain Capital, now rated the best impact fund in the world. I know, that was a surprise for me when I saw that too. In 2020, the governor was briefly a candidate for president. He continues his work today in impact investing and also to help increase civic engagement among disenfranchised and marginalized people across the country. I have had the pleasure to work for both of you, and I have been honored to do so. Each of you has a unique experience leading during challenging times. We look forward to hearing about how you have engaged people in the workforce, the community, and society. This is the first question. I'm going to start with Governor Patrick, and we're going to kick off with a few questions, and then we have some other questions from the audience as well. What can we do as a society to move forward our work on equity, diversity, and inclusion? Governor Patrick, what can you?
Great. Better? The same? Okay. I won't tell the same jokes. But I just to thank you very much for having me. And I was reminded on the way in that we came here, my wife and I, on Inauguration Day. And I have been here since, but we have really special feelings, as I think almost everybody who interacts with this hospital does, and certainly any parent does. So it's great to be with you. And on the subject you ask about, of course, it has been a big part of my life's work. It's been a big part of America's journey as a nation and the experiment. And I think that I feel incredibly excited about the moment we're in, as uncomfortable as it may make a lot of people, because frankly, if we're going to close the gap between our reality and the civic ideals on which the country is premised, it is going to make people uncomfortable. We have to get used to the idea of being uncomfortable. And we have to do more than wish for it. we have to be intentional. And that, I would say, we have done in fits and starts through our history. I want to add, if I may, I feel we seem to sort of fall into two sort of camps, if you will, when we talk about issues of race in this country. And I'm painting with very broad brushes, but those who seem to believe, you know, we've made no progress at all, and those who feel that, you know, I'll exaggerate and say that after freeing the slaves, there was nothing left to do. And the truth is that we've made extraordinary progress in this country, much of it in my lifetime. But it is still true that there is tremendous talent and ambition and creativity and grit in Black and brown communities all over the country, and we're crazy not to go get it, not to go get that talent and welcome it and make it affirmatively and intentionally a part of the larger community that we're trying to build, whether it's in a business or a hospital or in a government or what have you. So intentionality, I think, is a big part of it.
Dr. Churchwell, you want to add anything?
I think that's spot on, Governor. The idea around intentionality is something that we continue to talk about at Boston Children's. How do we take this moment in our history, and not make it just a moment? It is part of the fabric of how we care for children, equity, diversity, inclusivity. And how do we bring that to bear and bring the talent and the innovation that we have here at Boston Children's to make a difference? You know, you talked about our history. That reminded me of President Obama's statement around it being the original sin of racism, of inequity, and how it's going to take work to alleviate that original sin. But it takes intentionality, it takes drive, it takes that conversation that happens all the time. What I've told our folks is that our success will be predicated on us having this conversation a year from now, that we will continue to be talking about this moving forward. If we're not doing that, then that's a failure. And so I think what you've described is where we need to head.
I love hearing you make the point about, I think, Candace, you have another question, but just want to say it.
Please.
I love hearing you talk, Doctor, about the importance of having this conversation a year from now. Because, you know, in America, we have famously short attention spans. And we tend to gravitate toward the sensational, like, you know, flies to flame or something like that. And then move on when the next sensational thing happens. And it's especially true for things, as I said earlier, like race, that make us uncomfortable. And maybe race is the thing that makes us most uncomfortable. But I will say, you know, the founders knew what they were setting out to. They knew, even the slaveholders, they knew about it. Jefferson wrote that these principles are that the nation was being organized around. The way he described it is he trembles when he thinks that God is just, because he knew it was in contradiction with chattel slavery. He knew that, and there were those who made their peace with those early compromises and that original sin by believing that it would just kind of drift off on its own, that our fealty to the founding principles would be such that slavery would just kind of peter out, and the racism that supported it. And that turns out not to have been so. Doesn't mean that those principles are any less compelling. They still are. They are the thing that makes it critical for us, not just to hope for equality, opportunity, and fair play, but actually to act on it.
Candace, I know you're going to ask another question, but
Please.
there's another point that in your description it just comes to mind. That there's a great story around the American Revolution, around the American Revolutionary spies. And they were white, black, Indian. And they were not truly supported, but they made an incredible difference in terms of the war effort. And there was one individual who wrote a letter to his son, about the American Revolution and what he thought was going to happen next. And part of what was that he said the American Revolution just didn't stop at the end of the war. It will continue on. We will always be part of a revolution. And he told his son, be prepared. The next one is going to be the Civil War because we have not solved this issue around slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So even then, to your point, they knew this was going to be the issue.
Thank you both. Very insightful. What should healthcare's role in particular be with equity, diversity, and inclusion? Governor Patrick, happy to start with you.
He's a healthcare.
Okay. Put him on the spot then.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, please.
Sure. Well, I believe we should be a leader in this work. We talk about what we see every day and who we're responsible for. Yep. Governor, if you go into our lobby and see all the families that come to see us for care, you will see the United Nations. Mm-hmm. You'll see families of every race, color, creed, and it's fabulous. But that's a responsibility. How do we provide excellence in care to our families? And we need to represent that. We need to support our families and our caregivers. And equity, diversity, inclusivity is part of that. It's part of that discussion. It's part of how we need to think about our goals. It's part of how we think about who we recruit, who we develop, and who are part of the care team. And so healthcare should be a driving force from that standpoint as we go forward.
I love the way you talk about that. I can't tell you the number of settings I have been in. A patient seeking healthcare, or an executive in a business or in government and so on, where you meet people, really, really good, capable people, who feel that the sum of their technical skills is enough to actually deliver the care or the product, when in fact there's an ability to relate, there's an empathy, there's an understanding, there's a touch that is a big part of most settings, and I would say, if I may humbly, most especially in healthcare. It's so intimate. It's so, I've been working with a company that's doing sickle cell work for a long, long time. And one of the issues that we talk about is the patient population and their experience in the healthcare system when they are dealing with pain associated with organ failure or organ damage. And they come to an emergency room, and the first question is, are you an addict? And are you just here trying to score a painkiller of some kind or another? And how discouraging it is of them to get the care that they need. So there is so much work to do in this space, and I think some of it is, the diversity and inclusion of the team, from the top to the bottom, but some of it is learning. I guess the way I would put it is, I think we have made an uneasy peace in this country with non-discrimination laws. We haven't made our peace yet with integration, what it actually means to live and work and play and love in an integrated setting, what it actually means to have differences in your life and in your expectation. And that's the next chapter. I think that's the work that I believe this hospital and many other settings are having to do and are trying to do right now.
How do we become comfortable with those differences?
Right.
Not just accepting, but comfortable,
right,
and utilize it in our care.
And utilize it, yeah.
Thank you. That's a great conversation. This is particularly for our office. Government relations, we're huge advocates for patients and our community. What do we do to get people involved to advocate? Governor Patrick, I'll start with you.
Well, advocate for care or advocate for
equity, diversity, and inclusion. What do we do to get people involved? How do we?
I'm when trapped in my COVID isolation, I was watching all of these overwhelmingly peaceful protests all around the country after the George Floyd killing, and I remember being struck, first of all, and holding my breath, by the way, about they're remaining peaceful. They were overwhelmingly. I remember being struck by how diverse the crowds were, how large and diverse, and in every sense, racially and but also age and gender and so forth. And I thought to myself, you know what? There's a generation now that has put its collective foot down and said, you know, we've been talking about this, and how long has this country had governors? There have been 2 black governors elected. I'm the second, and that was 10 minutes ago. Now, you know, I remember after Barack Obama was elected and going to the first inauguration, and it was amazing. But how many people there thought, and media wrote about how we were in a post-racial world. We just, you know, we had a milestone, so we moved on. Everyone in this hospital should be excited that Dr. Churchwell is the leader of the hospital. No one in this hospital should be satisfied that you are finished with the work. And I'm not picking on the hospital. No. I'm just saying. So when we had our time in office, you know, one of the things governors get to do is appoint judges. So we were really purposeful about getting tremendous talent that was also diverse on the bench, and I think I'd say we broke all records. I don't think the records were that hard to break, but we made a lot of progress in that respect. The senior team and not just the team in the governor's office, Candace, you know this, but in the agencies and the sub-cabinet level was all very, very diverse, because there's so much talent out there and so much that people could offer. So I you know, I feel like I've been saying the same thing for like 30 years. That there's talent's everywhere, opportunities are limited unless we go get that talent, then we're going to continue, and unless we start doing stuff differently. Because if we always do what we always did, we always get what we always got.
Dr. Churchwell, anything to add from your perspective?
Just the ideas around how do we support the next generation or this generation? Because I agree with you. Just watching the images, they are ready to go.
Yeah.
They are impatient, and they are smart, and they want change. And how do we advise them? How do we support them? And I didn't say direct, but how do we do that good job in terms of supporting what they feel is important and making a difference? I think is a great opportunity.
Can I add one more thing? There's a writer, former columnist for the New York Times named Anand Giridharadas, who's he's one of the most fluent English speakers I've ever encountered, and he gave a speech at the Obama Foundation Summit years ago, in which he used this line. He was talking about how woke we all are now. And he said, the real challenge today is whether the woke will leave room for the still waking. And I think that's a profoundly important idea. Because it'd be one thing for folks to come along and say, you know, we'll take it from here, we're going to elbow everybody else out of the way. But if we're going to build lasting change, if we're going to build a compassionate community, not just folks who, this is to your point earlier, where we tolerate each other, but we actually understand and feed off of and thrive on our diversity, then we are going to have to bring along the people who come dragging their feet, and not say you don't have a place in this new community, and that is hard work. That's hard work. but vital work, I think.
You know, my dad was born 1917.
Mm-hmm.
My mom 1931 in Tennessee. So the idea around bringing folks along
Mm-hmm.
is something that they spent their entire lives doing.
Of course they did.
And it wasn't rejecting people. It was, how do we bring them along? How do we continue to work and build a better society? It's something that I saw a great deal of. And I saw success. It's not easy work, though. It's the harder part of the work to bring everybody along. But I agree with you. It's really important.
Sounds like we have a lot of work to do to bring people along based on this conversation in our advocacy. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Churchwell to just talk a little bit about, we do have a special guest coming today. Talk a little bit about what we're doing at Boston Children's Hospital to really push forward equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Well, Governor, we continue to use your words around intentionality. How do we intentionally support the work around equity, diversity, inclusivity? So internally, we as a collective body decided that we were going to put our stake in the ground around a declaration. And in that declaration, define the goals that we wanted to achieve moving forward. Not saying that we were going to achieve those goals in a month. They're going to take a little while.
Mm-hmm.
There are goals around recruitment and retention and development of a diverse workforce. There are goals around looking at our policies. You know, we've been around 150 years. And so what's embedded in our policies that really go to not promoting inclusivity and diversity,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we actually remove those,
Mm-hmm.
is a piece of work that we're doing. We're doing work around looking at the questions that our staff, those that work at Boston Children, ask around these issues, and how do we address them? What framework do we have for those individuals, for our people, in terms of that piece of work? We're doing work around education. How do we educate each other around this work? So we created something called our bystander upstander training that we've put on our net web for everyone to, and with the plan that everyone that works at Boston Children's will review that and understand that piece of work and support each other in terms of the work around inclusivity and diversity. And so that's one piece of work we're doing internally.
Mm-hmm.
We've also asked the question, how can we as Boston Children's continue to lead in this space? What does it take for us to do that? And with that, we've worked with our Board of Trustees, we've worked with our administrative leaders, our physician leaders, our nursing leaders, to develop what we believe is our next evolution, and that is our institute.
Mm-hmm.
With the support and leadership of Sandy Fenwick, we have announced that we have developed the Sandra L. Fenwick Institute for Health Equity and Inclusion.
Terrific. Congratulations.
Thank you. And with that institute, we are going to look internally and externally for this piece of work. How do we continue to develop that at Boston Children's, but also within pediatrics, with the pediatric focus, looking at nationally from that standpoint, looking at public policy, the research that's needed to actually truly understand what is happening and how we can address it, recruitment and retention, not just in the clinical space, but in the research space, is the piece of work that that institute will undergo.
That's excellent.
We're very excited about
I'm excited for you, and I wish you well.
We do have our special guest ready to say a few words. So we're going to have her say a few words, and then we'll come back for some questions.
it. Great.
Hello, everyone. It's really such an honor to be here today to see all of you. First of all, thank you, Dr. Churchwell, and of course, it's really wonderful to be here with you, Governor Patrick. And thank you for everything that you have done over the many years to make our Commonwealth, our communities, and of course, our nation a better place, not only for our patients and families, but really for everyone. So it's a real honor to be here with you all today to launch this institute and obviously to deepen our resolve to do this very important work. We talked in the past about, where we got started almost 15 years ago, really starting to think about diversity and cultural competence for our patients and families and our own teams. And it was an early start, and we made progress, but we truly didn't put it at the top of our agenda as much as until Dr. Churchwell actually came. And also made Valerie Ward, our Dr. Valerie Ward, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. And that took it to the next level. The pandemic really exposed even more inequities, and it truly led us to another call to action. And you just heard about our declaration and obviously the work that we have put in front of us. And as I have always talked about our need to invest in children, to think about holistic care, clearly equity in every dimension has probably been underemphasized, studied, and absolutely underacted upon. And so we have, as Kevin, Dr. Churchwell mentioned, our board, Kevin himself, our chiefs, our council, and so many people across the institution standing ready to roll up their sleeves and do this extraordinarily important work. I'm honored to support Dr. Ward with a children's chair that my family and I established to really support the leadership in this area. But also, I'm incredibly equally honored to have this institute named in my name. And you heard about the work, the research, the education, and the advocacy that we hope to have as a set of fundamental pillars of this institute. And to take, as Governor Patrick, you said, our learnings much more broadly, taking them to our communities, understanding the interventions that we will hopefully uncover, and advocating for change, for really lasting, as you also mentioned, lasting change. I've always stood for equal opportunity, for security for our basic needs, and obviously dignity for everyone. And I heard you talk about, even the aspects of what it's like to have people trying to not only get care, but to have the next generation of care equally applied to them. We've all had our challenges. I've been a woman, I've been a person from a different culture, a working mother, a non-physician in an academic setting. And I have always loved unmet needs where we can identify at Boston Children's the gaps and to address them, to solve them, and absolutely to lead. And so health equity and truly comprehensive well-being for all people, and especially for children and families, is where I believe Boston Children's can truly take up the mantle, even with greater rigor and with both intentionality and institutional commitment. And so thank you for the honor to be here today. It is really a pleasure to be here with you, Dr. Churchwell and Governor Patrick. And it is truly my pleasure to also introduce Dr. Valerie Ward, who is our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, but also who is the director of this institute. And she will tell you a little bit more. And again, many, many thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Dr. Churchwell. And it's a pleasure to hear the conversation today, Governor Patrick and Dr. Churchwell. I'm actually honored to be a part of the leadership team of the Sandra L. Fenwick Institute for Pediatric Health Equity and Inclusion. This institute is an exciting major initiative here at Boston Children's. I've been here many years, but this is truly a defining moment. I love the word intentionality that we're hearing today, because that is how we structured the Institute. We've been very thoughtful with our initiatives in 3 large focus areas, and I've heard all 3 areas in the conversation today. This is so impactful that health equity research that actually informs public policy will be a major pillar within our Institute. We have an Office of Government Affairs that we're going to work very closely with in order to really align our efforts and be a think tank and a change maker locally and nationally. And Sandy talks about inclusion and the work that we're doing in this institute. And together, we're working very closely in how to build inclusive leadership for our caregivers, our primary clinical caregivers, for our basic scientists, and for our administrators. We're being very holistic in how we intentionally build out our efforts. In the first few years of the Institute, we're going to hold ourselves accountable so that we really elevate the national conversation and have an impact on the global conversation as to what it means to be truly inclusive and what it means to advance pediatric health. And so with that, I say thank you. Thank you, Dr. Churchwell, for the opportunity to lead our Office of Health Equity and Inclusion. And thank you, Sandy and Kevin, for the opportunity to lead this institute.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Dr. Ward. It was great to hear from you. We are going to take some questions from the audience now. There was one question that was sent in advance. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we will take them. So the first question is, the pandemic has exacerbated the existing pediatric behavioral health crisis in our state and put a spotlight on inequities within the system of care. How is Boston Children's Hospital working to ensure equitable access to behavioral health services for kids across the state? I'm going to turn to Dr. Churchwell for this.
Well, that's a great question, and that's a timely question for us, in that the pandemic has certainly exacerbated a problem that we saw before the pandemic. The issue of our kids, our adolescents, young adults with behavioral and mental health issues is something that has continued to grow and become a significant issue. Just a few numbers associated with that. Prior to the pandemic, we were extremely busy in our hospital when we had upwards of 20 kids with those issues, 20 to 25 kids, either in our emergency department, on our regular floor, in our inpatient psychiatric unit. Last week we had 80.
Wow.
And I get asked, well, when you have 80, what do you do? And I say, well, you work to get to the next hour in terms of providing support, providing care for our kids with those issues. So we need solutions. And I think that what we have been doing is trying to putting what I call Band-Aids on the problem, putting fingers in the dike. But we need to take the ability to take a step back and look at what presently we're doing, but also what the future looks like. And that is, how do we provide care across the board? Care that is equitable, care that is top-notch for all of our kids who have these issues. And I believe we do that collaboratively. We don't do that in isolation. We do that by working with the city, with the state, and with our colleagues across the board that are doing this work in the Commonwealth. And so that's one of the major reasons we actually have done the work to affiliate with Franciscan Children's Hospital, a provider that has done fabulous work in the care of our kids with behavioral and mental health issues, along with rehabilitation issues. We believe joining together, we will be more powerful, stronger, ability to provide more services, create services that don't exist, services that all of our kids need across the board, no matter where they come from. You know, I talk about every children's hospital is the neighborhood hospital. We're the neighborhood hospital that surrounds us. We've got Mattapan, we've got Roxbury, we've got Brookline, we've got Wellesley. But it just so happens we're the neighborhood hospital for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because of the referrals that we receive from our colleagues, whether it's in the western part, the southern part. And so our ability to be that nexus, to be that connector for this care for all our kids is where we're headed, what I believe where we're headed, where we need to head, and how we're planning. Working with our collaborators, working with all individuals, all groups that have an interest and are dedicated to this piece of work is where we need to go, and it's where we're headed to solve this problem.
You know, when I think about your observation that there were 80 children needing, you know, the exponential increase of children here in the hospital who are in search of those services. How do you think about the ones who don't find their way to the hospital?
Right. So, Josh Grinkenberg and I, our head of government relations, we were having this conversation about an hour ago. And the hospital is one part of it. By the time the kids get to us, it's too late. Right? The issues that they're addressing have fulminated to the point that they need to come to the hospital.
That's
come
really
to the
what I'm
emergency
asking
department.
about, yeah.
And so we believe that and I think many of us in this piece of work believe there has to be a creation of a continuum of care. A care that starts at the home with the family, that then goes to the primary care pediatrician and support, that goes to the school system, that goes to the community-based programs, that goes to the state and to the city, that we're all part of a plan, part of a continuum of care, support, and program that supports our kids. What we would all like to see is that our kids never have to come to the hospital for these issues, that we have intervened, that we have created opportunities and care that really meets them where they are. And so that would be the goal.
Great, thank you. Continuum of care, and we're the collaborator in between all of it. Sounds like a great path forward. So I have a couple other questions, trying to see which is best for who. Let's start with this one. I guess I'll turn to Governor Patrick for this one. How important is diversity in public elected leadership to outcomes in our communities? How can we increase diversity in government roles?
I think it is important. I think diversity is important for the reasons I was saying earlier, because there's all kinds of talent. I think, by the way, maybe this is a footnote, but I'll mention it, that I think in elective roles anyway, we get more diversity if we made the jobs themselves or the getting of the job less onerous. And that's a whole other subject, but you know, we have a kind of an 18th century approach to, I've known two presidents pretty well, and they have left office with millions of dollars of debt because they have to, because of the things that, you know, we've been asking presidents to pay for while they were in residence in the White House since the time of George Washington. It's kind of a quaint but out-of-date system, and that's leaving aside just how brutal the experience is of getting office. But I do think we get better decisions. We get fuller decisions. Let me put it that way. You know, we didn't get everything right in our administration, but we had a lot of voices that we were interested in, that we paid attention to, that we sought out. Not just because I was sitting in the room, but because there were others I brought into the room who kept reminding me, you know, you got to go check with this one. You should really listen to this one. You should hear from that point of view. And so the right decisions we made, I think, were more right than they would have been, and we probably got more things right as a result of having a range of views with whom to consult. And I think the other part of that is essential, frankly, in any setting, but certainly in a public policy setting, is humility. You know, no one person, no one party has a corner on all the best ideas. And, you know, if you're actually in the, you know, there are a lot of people who want to have those jobs without doing those jobs. If you actually want to do the job, a little humility, I think, can go a long way to helping you do it better.
A lot of voices to make really good decisions. I like that. We certainly have a lot of voices at Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Churchwell can attest to that as well.
I sometimes say a cacophony.
This next question, I think it might have to be our last question, but I'm looking at my, maybe we may have time for one more. So this is for Dr. Churchwell. What is BCH doing to recruit providers of color? How does diversity among the hospital impact access to quality of care for members of minority communities?
Well, we're doing a couple of things in different areas. So I'll start with the clinical area, in that we've had the intentional conversation with our chairs of departments around really pushing forward a diverse recruitment effort, looking across the board at the talent, as you described, Governor, across this nation, and bringing that talent, that diverse talent here, and part of goal setting for them from that standpoint. And so we're actually measuring that and keeping track of that recruitment and retention. We're also doing the work in our research environment, and that working with Harvard Medical School, there was a development of a cluster approach of recruitment, of dollars put aside for specifically diverse hiring of researchers. Children's hospitals stepped in with 2 feet in terms of that recruitment. I'm proud to say that I think that we may, and I'm knocking on wood here, may have recruited at least 2 to 3 individuals in the past year that will be part of our research community and have diverse backgrounds. But I want to say that we're not done. We're not saying, well, we've had this year and then we'll just stop. This is a continued process of recruitment and retention and thinking about creating that diverse environment, that diverse workforce. And it starts not just at the level of the attending in terms of recruitment of physicians or the senior nurse, but it starts at individuals who are interested at the college level, at the high school level. How do we create that pipeline? How do we make that pipeline part of Boston Children's, that they are exposed to what happens here and that they want to be part of us as they develop their careers? So we're doing that in the nursing environment with what we call our Lattice program. We're doing it with our coach environment, coach program for our administrative leaders. And we're reaching out into the school systems in terms of the STEM programs. How do we support them in terms of getting kids who are interested in science and math and saying, well, why don't you take a look at us? Why don't you take a look at the healthcare environment? Why don't you take a look at Boston Children's? We know we're not going to get everybody, but that's not the point, right? The point is to grow the pot so that there's an opportunity for those kids a generation from now to be part of Boston Children's.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you. So this is our last question. As we work to bring people along, there are still people suffering inequitable outcomes and unrealized potential. How do we forge ahead to make change now? Governor Patrick, start with you.
Well, I think first of all, we don't forget them. I'd say we have to. They are the reason for the urgency of now. You know, the fact that there are folks who are feeling, quite rightly, the disappointment of promises made and not kept in the past ought to stir us all to be more focused on outcomes. And I think, you know, we should acknowledge as we go, maybe more to this humility point, we are not going to get it all right. But if we're listening to each other, if it isn't about us versus the folks in resistance, but us trying to, all of us, collaborate toward a better outcome, and if we bear in mind what, Candace, you remember I always preached about in office, our generational responsibility, that we're supposed to do stuff right now that leaves things better for those who come behind us, then I think we do make progress, and we deserve the progress that we make.
Dr. Churchwell, you want to add?
No, I think that's just spot on. I think that we have to continue to listen and be responsive and understand that we're not going to get everything right. And that's maybe not the total goal. The goal is to directionally continue to improve what we do. And we only do that by actually being part of the solution. First part is to get out of being part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And our next step is to be part of the solution moving forward.
Well said.
Listening, humility, being part of the solution to make progress. This has been a great conversation. I do want to tell folks in the audience if they do have questions, they can direct them to the Office of Government Relations. I want to thank our 2 panelists very much, former Governor Deval Patrick, and Dr. Kevin Churchwell. Thank you so much for being here, and I do want to thank Sandy Fenwick and Dr. Valerie Ward for being here as well. Thank you very much, everybody.